Okay, everybody. Apparently, we're good to go. We are live. Sorry for the slight delay there. Just waiting for the green light to go on. But anyway, welcome everybody to the 60-minute build up, the anticipation. We have a great guest for you tonight. I'm going to introduce any second now. Before I do, a quick thank you to our sponsors as always, who are backers and supporters. They are Jura, Fanatics, Sedulu, Source One Associates, Vinex, and IPS. Don't forget, next week on Tuesday night, we have our next edition of the Sports Quiz with the Stars. The man who will be co-hosting the quiz with me is none other than Formula One star Johnny Herbert. And 2 weeks after that, we have another edition of the Sports Quiz with the Stars. And my co-host for that particular edition is the greatest British Winter Olympian of all time, two-time gold medalist, Lizzie Arnold. But anyway, that's for another day. Let's concentrate on tonight. And tonight's guest, as you well know, is, I think without doubt, the country's leading all-round sports promoter. You can call him Mr. Snooker if you like. You can call him Mr. Darts if you like. Being a massively influential figure in boxing for the last 30 years or so. Former chairman of Leyton Orient as well. And he's also more than dabbled in fishing, table tennis, poker, gymnastics, you name it. It's Mr. Barry Hearn. And hopefully, God willing, Barry is there right now. Hopefully, Barry's going to come in any moment now. I see some activity. I see some activity. There is Barry. Barry, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Ian. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, that's always have a relief. Sorry for the slight delay there. We had a minor technical hitch. Such is the beauty of Zoom and video conferencing. But we're good to go now. Lovely to see your angelic face down the screen, Barry. And to start off with, well, it's the obvious thing, really. What strange times we're living in. You've seen a lot of things in your your life. This is a first. How have you found lockdown personally, and what sort of positives have you taken out of it? What positives should we be taking out of it?
Well, as usual, Ian, I take positives out of everything because my glass is always half full. But a time like this is quite unprecedented in my life. I grew up just after the end of the Second World War, so I didn't understand that particular lockdown and the poverty that followed. But at the same time, this is something quite unprecedented and something that no one could have seen coming. I have to say, although it's a dreadful thing we're going through and the world is going through, from a business front, I find it quite challenging. And for that reason, I'm fairly motivated by it. And I think it's given me an opportunity to be more reflective because I've had the one ingredient I don't get much of, which is time. I've had time to sit there and think about things and to question the way I do things, the reason I do things, why I'm doing those things in the first place, what my goals are, what my goals should be, and perhaps some of the mistakes that we all make during life that you can look back and actually change. I think we're going to come out of COVID-19 with a feeling of great creativity and optimism for the future, simply because of the character of us, business people, British business people in particular. I'm a very big follower of Great Britain Limited. And I think that we can shock the world again by our inventiveness, but learn the lessons that perhaps we may have got a little complacent. We may have got a little bit podgy around the middle. The one thing in life which I find frustrating and I've tried to avoid is complacency. And it's difficult when things are going so well. But as in any relationship, and business is just like another relationship, sometimes we take things for granted. And COVID-19 has taken things away from us that we didn't realise how much we were missing. And that makes us more appreciative and it makes us a little bit more thoughtful on the way forward because now we can only look forward. We mustn't look back.
Yeah, I guess, and I agree with absolutely everything you say there, Barry. It has given us, a lot of us, myself included, a bit of much needed headspace to just have a look at things, see what you're doing right, see what you're doing wrong. And I guess it's also, as you say, okay, it's a challenge for us all. So the challenge is be creative, evolve, go with the flow?
Well, I'm very fortunate because although I tend to take all the credit for everything that goes well, I'm totally reliant, of course, on an amazing group of people that are involved in the Matchroom group of companies across 12 different sports. And it's been fabulous for me to listen for once, instead of talking all the time, and listen to young people coming up with ideas like, why don't we do darts at home? Filmed on your mobile. Let's generate some income by bookmakers, fixture rights, by sponsorship, by TV. Let's keep these self-employed sportsmen and women that we work with, that we owe, let's keep them busy. Let's keep them earning money. And that little idea suddenly generated 43 days of activity. And then we said, well, let's move on from here. Why don't we look at being the safest place in the United Kingdom? Let's create a bubble, the first time ever in British sport, in actually the first time ever in world sport, where we created a totally safe environment for behind closed door snooker. And that was an amazing success, 11 days. And then we did tour championships. And now we're starting to think even more creatively, how do we get to that next stage of having a live audience back at sporting events? Because although we get starved of sport, we'll accept anything. And although we can do technical tricks with crowd noise, it's not the same without a crowd. So our next focus now, we're going to carry on with behind closed doors events. Dart starts next week. But we're looking now to move heaven and earth to try and get, under government rules and with the backing of local council support, the World Snooker Championships with a live crowd, perhaps our biggest challenge.
Yeah, I tell you what, Barry, do you think you can slightly move your phone because you've got a lot of ceiling ahead of you? And that's better. Perfect. There we go. You now see, there's more to you than just a head. There's some shoulders there as
well. The head's the most important part,
But the shoulders need to carry it, remember.
Well, they're getting some work these days.
Okay, so I need to ask you as well, you're looking, as always, in good form. You had a little bit of a health scare, didn't you, a few weeks ago at the beginning of lockdown? Are you okay?
Yeah. Absolutely fine. Got brilliantly. I was a bit embarrassed because of all the disasters everywhere else. My little heart problem was nothing much. A couple of stents banged in. Basildon Cardiac, big call out for them because they were brilliant. And I have to just say, the apple crumble and custard at Basildon Cardiac Hospital is a different class, mate. So, yeah, that was 4 days out of my life. Didn't change a thing. Straight back into action and enjoying myself, as always.
Good to hear. Okay, well, you mentioned being born. You were born in 1948, so it was in Dagenham, the East End of London. I would imagine 3 years, maybe less than 3 years after the end of the war, very much in recovery mode. You won't remember those first few years, but you'll probably remember life from the mid-50s onwards. What was it like growing up on a council estate in Dagenham, fairly recently post-war, in the sort of a mid-50s, and how did sort of you begin to understand the machinations, if you like, of entrepreneurial skills? Because you did a bit at school, didn't you? A little bit of business even at school.
I did lots of things. I think as early on as a child, and although we were growing up in obviously quite poor conditions because of employment, my father was very ill at a young age and things like that. But children, they don't know any different. We grew up as we grew up. We got up, we woke up in the morning, we had something to eat, we went to school. We were surrounded by love. I had a very happy childhood. Other than my father being ill, there was no reason. It was only later on when you get to sort of the more mental age of 8, 9, 10, 11 that you start looking around and realizing there are other people that were in a different position to you, and it was for you to decide how you were going to react to that. It wasn't an envious situation. It was more an aspirational situation. And clearly where we were, we could see the big houses on the top of the hill. And I asked the question quite early in my life, why haven't I got one of those? And clearly there was lots of reasons. There were lots of barriers to entry, all the things I hate now. There was a lot of inequality. There was a lack of opportunity from people that hadn't been to the right school or the right university or didn't have the right parents or the right money in the family. So it became quite clear quite early that not being a genius, because I'm not, there was one special asset that I felt I had that other people didn't have, which was a work ethic that refused to be beaten. And it was that work ethic that drove me into looking at, frankly, anyway, hopefully legal, anyway, to make a living and to start acquiring some of the things that I'd seen that we'd never had in our family. And for that reason, I started everything from car washing rounds to window cleaning to gardening. Later on in life, you worked the doors on the local clubs. You did anything to make a living. And nothing wrong with that. I wanted things, but I understood there were two ways to get it. You could go down the wrong path and try and get it at the fast route, or you could go down the right path. And fortunately, I had a very dominant mother that wouldn't let me go down the wrong path and forced me to go down the right path, which was basically getting off your backside and refusing to accept second best. And I became relentless from that early age. And although it sounds crazy, I've always been a saver. I've always been someone who tries to invest in things myself first and then assets afterwards. But that came from, I think my mother was very driven in that she wanted the very best for her children. And she understood that came from education, discipline, and determination. And they were the three facets that we brought into play.
So again, you've just slipped down a bit. If you could just move your phone. There we go. There we go. Perfect. And I was just going to say, Barry, funnily enough, all those sort of jobs, they working on the doors and the car washing, and I think you were picking fruit and veg and almost anything really. You say might have been frowned upon. I bet you look back on those early days, and you think, you know what, I picked something up from all of those jobs.
I think you look at yourself, and today with COVID-19 is a similar situation. There comes a time when it comes down to the character that you have and the will to win, if you like, the desire to be something. I think it's easier when you're poor because you're not following any big act. You've got nothing to beat. So we start off trying to put food on the table, and perhaps we develop from there to looking at buying a house or buying a nice car. And you're driven by those sort of success stories as the ladder of life takes you further up, and no one knows where you're going to end up. I mean, that's the exciting thing about life. You have no genius can foretell the future, and no one could have seen COVID-19 coming. No one could have seen the financial crisis. Perhaps they could have seen that 2008, but we've had successive. I've gone through 3 recessions so far in my life, and each one has posed very serious problems. But each time those problems have been posed, I think they've formed the character in me, the people around me, the company I operate. And that character formation is what takes us to different levels when we're allowed to, when we have the opportunity. And this COVID-19 will be no different. We will, as a group, I am certain, come out stronger than we went in. And that's what we've got to aim with every part of our life. We've just got to be the best we can be. We're not going to get anything more than that. And we don't expect favours from anyone. Just be the best you can be.
So you qualified as an accountant. Presumably back then you had as you've just said, you had no idea really where your path was going to go. But fortuitously, as it turned out, one of the things you did was you bought a snooker hall in Romford. I think predominantly as a property investment, did it? But as it turned out, your timing could have been better.
Well, there's the lesson in life, isn't it? It's much better to be lucky than good looking, as you know already when you look in the mirror, and
some of us are both.
You need that little bit of luck in life. You can be the brightest kid on the street, but you need to be in the right place at the right time. You need to have that bit of luck. Most important, then you have to have the ability to maximise on that luck. And with me, I bought a chain of snooker halls for the company I was working with. Later on, I ended up owning a significant part of that company. But at the initial movement, it was as a property investment because the snooker halls themselves were in town centre sites. And I thought the downside was limited because of the asset value I was buying. Those of my age will remember people like Jim Slater, that was probably one of the great asset entrepreneurs of our time. And that was the basis of how he worked. And I just copied a laid out formula. But of course, when the luck came in was within 6 months or so, the BBC in their wisdom decided to put snooker live on TV. And suddenly I was hailed as a genius for spotting this amazing, development in British sport. And of course, it was pure luck. But I didn't tell anyone that. I just took the money.
Yeah. Well, it was colour, wasn't it? It was the advent of colour. And no sport is served better by colour TV than snooker. Suddenly it all started to make sense, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, snooker started in black and white in 1969, Pot Black on BBC. But it was the early 70s when it really took off with colour TV. And that coincided with my acquisition of about 20 clubs in the southeast of England, which suddenly became rammed from morning till night. And as I say, you know, I always take the credit where possible, but I'm in my quiet moments. So, you know, I'm resigned to the fact that that was just the beginning of a whole chain of events through my life where, whether you say God has smiled on you or you're fated to do well or you've had some ability, but it does come down to right place, right time so often. And that's where that can be the difference between success and failure.
Yeah. So in 74, you started to do events. And in 76, you decided to become the manager of a young man with a shock of ginger hair called Steve Davis, who went on to win 6 world champions. I guess everybody has to have somebody that kickstarts it. You know, in the case of Richard Branson, it's Mike Oldfield and the Tubular Bells. With you, it all begins with Steve Davis, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And again, you know, the recurring theme in our conversation tonight will be what a lucky boy you are and you were in the right place. As I say, it has to be backed up with ability at some stage to maximise, to exploit that luck. But Steve Davis literally walked off the street one day to play in one of my amateur snooker events. I can't say I recognised immediately how good he was. I can't say I recognised that he would eventually be my best mate for over 40 years. But that all came about on the back of this crescendo snooker boom that was happening. And suddenly I found myself not only as involved in ownership of the biggest snooker chain in the country, suddenly I had the best player in the world. And of course, this was joy to me. I mean, this was the gravy to my meat and potatoes. You know, this is what I needed. I had all these ideas. But, you know, you can't do it on your own. I need it. And Davis was the leverage that gave me the access to TV, to sponsors, to promoting sport around the world. I needed that superstar flag bearer. And in Steve Davis, I got the very best sporting ambassador that to my mind, that this country has ever produced.
You don't become a world champion in any sport once, let alone 6 times, without having something special about you. What was it about Steve Davis, as you say, not that you particularly knew, I guess, but he didn't hit you immediately. He didn't, when he walked into the room, he didn't go, this is it, this is my, my golden nugget. So what was it about Steve that made him achieve what he did?
I mean, it certainly wasn't his winning charm and personality at the time, because he was boring, you know, quite dull and lacking in confidence. But there was a relentlessness about him that I could associate with. There was a will to win. There was a steely-eyed determination that I hadn't seen unless I looked in a mirror. And although we were quite different personalities, I was the loud big mouth and he was the technical genius, we gelled immediately because I never told Steve how to pot a ball and he never told me how to do a deal. So we both did exactly what we were born to do, and we complemented each other. But it was Steve's relentless approach, fueled by his father, Bill, who was a tough taskmaster in the old school discipline. You've got to do so many hours, you've got to put this work in. But of course, on a hand, you know, on a dead ball situation like snooker, which is very much hand-eye coordination, you know, you need to be a little bit like a Pavlov's dog. You need to make sure that you can work repetition efficiently. And Davis became a winning machine. He wasn't the most technically gifted or born to play starlet like a Ronnie O'Sullivan or a Jimmy White or Alex Higgins. He was a winning machine, and that was cultivated by his father and then exploited by Steve because he had the relentless approach to just be the best he ever could be.
Yeah, well, Barry, the world is full of wasted talent, isn't it? Talent alone isn't enough. And you and I both know enough sports people who perhaps haven't achieved as much as the person next to them, even though they maybe have twice the talent, but they haven't put in the work.
Well, I mean, we live in a life where we're sad to say that there's not as many what they call personalities in sport anymore. And the reason for that is because personalities don't consistently win. You know, personality player is generally someone who plays sport as he lives his life. And if they're risk takers, let's be honest, they're more exciting to watch, aren't they? If they can talk and they've got a personality outgoing, they can be more entertaining. But they don't necessarily win. And as sport becomes more mature, as they are better advised, better coached, better trained, they have the experience of watching their forefathers on how they messed up, if you like, to eradicate certain mistakes. The personality drops away a little and excellence shines through. So the technical standard is far better than it was today in most sports. But nevertheless, we're at the expense of the characters, because characters don't win consistently enough.
Yeah, and that's the same in all sports. So the snooker stable quickly grew. I know Tony Mayer was alongside you there with Steve Davis, and then Terry Griffiths, who won the world title. That recently and very sadly departed Willie Thorne, Jimmy White, and of course Dennis Taylor. And I suppose the absolute nirvana for snooker was for 1985. For those watching old enough to remember, you'll never forget it. The greatest snooker final of all time. Dennis Taylor won 18-17, and it took them both an eternity to sink that final black, because both of them were an absolute mess by the end. Davis was your man, but I'm sure you were rubbing your hands thinking, wow, it cannot get better than this in your hand. I don't know what the audience was, but it was gone midnight, wasn't it? And there were millions and millions, I think 18 million, wasn't it, watching?
It was 18.7 million just after midnight. And I wasn't thinking at the time, this is lovely for snooker. I was thinking, I wish Davis would just bloody win this. I mean, don't forget, he led 8-0. 8-0. You don't beat Davis from 8-0 down. Somehow Dennis clawed his way back, and it became one of the great moments of snooker history. And frankly, now we look back and say it was very good for the game. At the time, it was suicidal watching it, and I'm still having therapy to forget the moment that Davis missed the final black. But no, we have to put it down, as you do with any great sporting moment, as one of those memories that we'll never tire of watching, and we'll never. For me, my life changed in 81 when Davis won the World Championships, but 85 probably was the kickstart point where it really became a mainstream sport in everyone's mindset and began its global exploitation, which we've been a major part of ever since.
Couple of other things that we've got to move on to. I'd like to move on to boxing, but just before we leave snooker, tell us very quickly the story behind something else that just sticks in people's minds, and that is Chaz and Dave's snooker loopy.
Yeah, well, Chaz, unfortunately, we lost a little over a year ago now, and as usual, I'm sitting as I do. I sit around looking at sport, loads of different sportsmen and women, and thinking, how can we be better? How can we do this job better? How can we exploit this better? How can we make more of it? And when you're passionate, and I am passionate about everything I do, inevitably you realise that the only thing bigger, or the things that are bigger than sport, music is far bigger than sport. Movies, bigger than sport. And sport comes third, but it's very important to everyone's state of health and enjoyment of life, and unifies countries and does all the good things. So one day I was just thinking, the one thing we're missing, we've done our Matchroom aftershave, we've done our books, we've done our various commodities from bed clothing to, we were the first to really exploit name awareness coupled with commercial brands. And I picked up the phone and phoned Chaz. I'd met him a few times, and I was a big fan. I said, I need a song. He said, what do you need? I said, I need a snooker song. You're the man to give me a snooker song. He said, what's it going to be about? I said, well, I've got all these players under contract. Make it about them. And he said, what are they like? And I gave him a line from each one. Davis is a bit boring. Willie Thorne, bless him, he's bald. Jimmy White's not too good at the reading and writing. And Tony Meo cries and eats spaghetti. And 10 minutes later, he came back and said, I've got the song. It's called Snooker Loopy. And it sold 220,000 records and got to number 4 in the parade. And I managed to get myself on top of the pops for 3 words. I had to say, sod that ball. But the BBC blanked out the word sod. And my recording career was cut by a third overnight. So that ball was the only thing that came out. And of course, it just added to this roller coaster ride of snooker becoming in everyone's mindset. And when you start promoting a sport, whether it's darts, snooker, boxing, it's personality driven, but the sport itself has got to be in everyone's minds. There's got to be things that you talk about at work or at school, because that's what makes it popular. Word of mouth is still the most important form of media awareness that we can possibly get.
And finally, just in Formula One, you speak to drivers, and a lot of them will say that Ayrton Senna was the greatest driver ever, even though statistically he's some way off being the greatest driver. And nobody would say Ronnie O'Sullivan's not had an amazing career, because he has it. He's won it 5 times. But he's statistically not the greatest. But you speak to the snooker players, and a lot of them will say he's the greatest of all time. But going back to your point, and as I say, he's had a great career. But perhaps if he had the mentality of Davis, he'd be over the horizon, wouldn't he?
Well, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. Yes, of course, if he had Davis's mentality and he maintained the way he played and the ability he has, I mean, he could have won just about everything, in my view. But sometimes when you take out the missing link, if you like, you know, the Alex Higgins, the Jimmy Whites and the Ronnie O'Sullivans, in their own way, were all born gifted. They were born to play snooker at the very highest level. They saw the game differently than other players see it. If you take away the bad side of them, if you like, or the more controversial side, the less consistent side, perhaps you wouldn't have been left with the same player to start with. You see, people like us can't really evaluate geniuses because we're not geniuses. We don't understand the world they come from. So there is, you know, it's easy to say if Ronnie O'Sullivan followed Steve Davis's discipline, he would win 15 world championships. But if he lived that type of life, he may not have been that type of player to start with. So who knows?
That's exactly the point.
I think we have to just accept what we're lucky enough to see.
Yeah.
In the world of snooker, I would still put Ronnie O'Sullivan as the greatest ever player. And I would probably put Stephen Hendry second and Steve Davis third. But again, it's a waste of time because they weren't actually playing each other at their peak. And it's difficult to know whether they'd raise their game with the competition that would exist if all those great players were at their peak. But there's been innumerable players that deserve applause. And I think we should just enjoy them at the moment when they are playing snooker from the gods. And Ronnie seems to do it more and more often these days, but perhaps not as often as he should.
Yeah, that's exactly the point Ernie Els said to me a few years ago when it was him and Tiger Woods, but Tiger was above him. And Ernie said the same thing. People say to me, why don't I have the discipline of Tiger Woods and stop enjoying having the odd beer from time to time? He said, but that would change me, and I think I'd do worse. So that underlines your point. Yeah. Anyway, moving on, because we've got a lot to get through. You got into boxing in '87, and your first promotion was just a small little number, Frank Bruno against Joe Bugner at White Hart Lane. So no half measures with you. Why do you decide to get into boxing and, if you like, disrupt the Cozy Cartel?
Well, I had done 2 small shows featuring the late Gary Mason as a build-up because I've always been a fight fan. I don't know why, but from 7 or 8 years old, I was listening on my transistor radio underneath my bedclothes at 3 o'clock in the morning on Archie Moore and Muhammad Ali and fighters like that coming in from the States. I didn't really even start probably going into the gym and sparring and people like that until I was in my late 20s, because I'd always wanted to do it, but I had other priorities, which was trying to make a business success. And when I did finally get the opportunity, I found out I wasn't very good. So that was a bit of a career setback. So promotion was obviously with the chosen career that I'd set out. I'd always been a fight fan. I'd always go to the ABAs, the London, the Nationals. I'd always go to local fights, and then I'd start going to professional fights. And I went to some of the old fights with Mickey Duff and the cartel that was arranging for BBC. And frankly, I thought I could do a lot better. I didn't think the shows were very good. I thought the fights weren't competitive. I didn't think the customer experience was good enough. All the sort of things that are in my mindset the whole time about how do you make this business successful. I think they got complacent with the BBC money, so they didn't try hard enough to maximise their business. They got lazy. They were okay at what they did, but they were lazy. So when I decided to get involved, being the nature of the beast I am, I didn't really want to get involved on something small. I wanted to put on fights that I wanted to see. Matchroom as a company has evolved promoting sports that I like to play and I like to watch. So I don't particularly like tennis. I'm not a great fan of motorsport. So I won't promote those sports. I'm not criticising them. They just don't turn me on. Well, boxing has always turned me on. In fact, of all the sports I do on a one-night basis, boxing is the most exciting thing you can watch. So I had the idea of, if I had the ability to do it, what fight would I want to watch? And what I wanted to watch was Frank Bruno, the nation's favourite, because everyone loved Big Frank, quite rightly. He's a smashing bloke, against the evil Joe Buckner, who beat Henry Cooper, and then
never forgiven.
Never forgiven, and went off to Australia. So I thought to myself, well, this, and I just decided I was going to do it. And I had some money and I managed to throw it around, and somehow or the other, I winged it because I didn't know what I was doing, frankly. It was a massive success. It got another 18 million audience, sold 33,000 tickets at Wembley, to Tottenham. And it wasn't a great fight. It wasn't a bad fight, but everyone left saying they'd been to an occasion. And I think that sums up what I try to achieve. Sport is great, but it needs to be an occasion to be super great. And super great means you've got a chance to make the sport bigger, to generate more revenue, to pay more prize money or more purses. But it's a team action. Joe Bugner and Frank Bruno, they worked with me as one of the team to make that show as big as it was. And we all shared in the benefits, so everybody was happy.
Well, you've had, I can't go through them all, but you've had some wonderful fighters on your books and fighting your promotions over the years. We mentioned Big Frank, national treasure that he was. You got the whole Ben Eubank era, of course. What a great era that was. Lennox Lewis, Nazim Hamed, of course. You had a lot of Naz catapulting into the ring. Steve Collins, Herbie Hyde, and so on and so on. I'll get on to AJ in a moment. Eubank, I mean, boxing, unlike darts and snooker, though, boxing's dangerous. It always will be. It's a lot better now, but I'll always remember it, and I'm sure you'll always remember it as well. 91 back at Tottenham, Eubank, Watson. And that was, they talk about F1 and the Senna moment and how that changed the sport. I guess Eubank Watson changed boxing, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was the worst night of my boxing life, without a question. It's not too much goes past without me thinking about it. Michael Watson is an exemplary character and just one of the nicest people. And through his belief and whatever, he's made a life where most people, he wasn't going to be around. I mean, he's an amazing character. But, of course, what Michael does is one thing he takes in his stride and saying it was God's will, and he accepts it, and that's what makes him great. But also, the beneficiaries are boxers today who, although Michael suffered some tragic injuries, the boxers today are much safer because of Michael Watson. So you try to take some positive out of a very negative situation. It was a great fight, by the way. It was a great fight. And as Chris Eubank, who I was very close with at the time, would tell you, he was beaten Eubank to pulp. And the fight was over. He walked on to one punch. And that's how tenuous boxing can be. In a way, it makes it more prehistoric. And in another way, it makes it so exciting because you never know what is round the corner in life, and especially so in boxing. And we should always be aware how dangerous the sport is. For that reason, no amount of money that any fighter gets should ever be criticised, because of the dangers they take. And they take those risks not only to entertain us, but they take those risks to change their life, which is why I don't know a boxer that can come from a middle-class family. I think you have to have that relentlessness in you, that desire to go through punishing training sessions that normal humans, I don't think boxers are normal humans. They are something very special. And to reach the levels that some of these guys reach is a sacrifice beyond belief. So whatever they get, they deserve, but they do accept that there are risks involved, and it's something we have to live with. We try to make everything as safe as possible. You can never take the risk out of boxing, and you should never forget about that risk.
You have a very impressive current stable at Matchroom. Your flagship boxer just happens to be the heavyweight champion of the world, Anthony Joshua. And You know, is there absolutely anything wrong with that guy? He must be the promoter's dream. He's obviously an amazing boxer. He's a good-looking boy. You know, your mum would like to take him home to introduce you to his daughter. He does nearly all the right things. He's a marketeer's dream as well. Of all the boxers you've had over the years, and try and be objective about this if you can, he's an absolute dream, isn't he, for you?
Yeah, well, there's no question he is, but it starts off with the fact that he must be able to fight. You know, there's been lots of people who have talked a good fight over the years and they get found out. Anthony is, I think, a bit bigger than a boxer. I think he's a very special human being. And I think in time we'll see how special he is. I hope I won't be disappointed. I don't believe I will. But at the same time,
just disappeared off the screen. Oh, you're back. There you go.
There we're back. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was the boss. That was the boss phoning. That's Eddie, because boxing is Eddie's department, not mine at the moment. No, not mine at the moment or ever. He's much better than his dad. But Anthony Joshua has a lot going for him. I mean, apart from physical attributes and an engaging personality, he's smart and he thinks and he goes away and thinks. And I think in time, you see, I don't want to be too highbrow here, Ian, but I think top sportsmen have additional levels of responsibility in terms of what they put across, how they portray themselves, how they portray their sport. They can drive their own sport forward, but they can also inspire future generations and people around the world on a variety of different subjects, either directly connected with their sport or ancillary to their sport in life. Yeah. And I think Muhammad Ali is a great example of what he contributed. Now, I'm not going to try and tell you that AJ is the next Muhammad Ali, but I think he is the next Anthony Joshua. And I think there is a role to actually develop the voice and the platform that he has. Of course, he needs to be excellent at his chosen sport. And that's what makes it so exciting, because you can't take anything for granted. We went to Madison Square Gardens against someone who looked like a very overweight Mexican, and he stopped AJ. I mean, the unthinkable happened. And then we had the whole soap opera of getting ready for the rematch, and Joshua boxed picture perfect and regained his title. Now we have this Tyson Fury and him. These are personality driven. Boxing is more personality driven, perhaps, than any other sport out there, because it's so up close and personal. But I think in Anthony Joshua, we may have, and I don't want to put pressure on him, we may have someone really special on a variety of levels. But he also needs to be the unified world champion, and he needs to keep winning. And I believe he will.
Yeah, you mentioned Tyson. I didn't want to bring him up just to say, really, you've seen most things in sport. I've got to be honest with you. When you saw the state of Tyson physically and mentally back in 2016, you felt there's no way back for him to get a draw. And also in that first fight against Deontay Wilder, when he was put down, it was game over, and he sort of rose almost from the dead. And then to do what he did in the second fight, which was very, very impressive. So I know he's not your man, but you're a fair man as well.
You cannot help but be impressed. I agree with you, Ian, completely on this. Look, I first came across Tyson Fury years ago when he was an amateur, and him and his dad were there, and we were just chatting. And he's an impressive figure as a man. I mean, he's huge, and he's got a great name. All the things I need to start with. And I remember they said, give us £100,000 and we'll turn professional with you. And I thought, I didn't think he was worth £100,000, to be honest. Later on, I probably wished I had given him that. But when I saw, obviously, the problems he had, well-documented problems, today there are no secrets with social media, and, you can't do anything quietly. So, to my mind, to be perfectly honest with you, I'd written him off. No one comes back from where he was. So, irrespective of my attitude about he's a rival or he's an alternate promotion person, put that to one side. He has my utmost respect for what he's done with his life. I think it's an amazing turnaround. That doesn't mean to say that I don't want Anthony Joshua to go in and knock his spark out, because I know, and there'll be lots of rubbish talked in boxing. Don't confuse all of that, because behind the scenes, if there is such a thing, Tyson Fury gets on quite well with Eddie. They'll talk, they'll have a laugh, they'll take the mick out of each other. They also know they're in opposite camps and they've got but that's okay. Because when the bell goes in the four-cornered ring, all the bullshit stops. All the jibes and the bad language and the silly stunts, all that stops. It's two men in the most basic of art. Yeah. And that's the art of pugilism.
I tell you what, you've done some big promotions in your time, but considering where they are both right now in their lives and in their sports, hard to see a bigger fight.
There isn't a bigger fight.
Fury v Joshua.
I think Fury against Ruiz in Saudi was the biggest grossing heavyweight title fight of all time. This fight against Fury makes that look like you'll call Bethnal Green. This is a colossal fight with a huge amount of money. And I know people will always say, oh, it should be in England. It should be. I lost count of how many experts there are out there telling me how to run the sports business across a variety of sports. And all we say is this, please imagine our responsibility, primary responsibilities to the athlete. They're the people taking the blows. They're the people sacrificing their life. They're the people potentially getting injured, which may affect their later life. So my job, Eddie's job, Matchroom's job, is to maximise whether you're a dart player, whether you're a snooker player, whether you're a boxer. That's our job. The punter's choice is to decide whether we've made it attractive enough for them to come and watch it or to pay to watch it. And it's freedom of choice. We don't tell you what to do. We just set the stage. We won't sell you a seat, but your ticket will cover the edge of that seat because our job is to make sure that's the only part of that seat you require, if that makes sense.
So two very obvious questions, Barry. I mean, it's clearly going to happen. It's just a question of when. And the second question, and this is really hard for you to answer objectively, but when it is announced, people will come up with very strong arguments for either of them winning. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest boxing expert, but I know enough to know that any result's possible.
The job that Tyson Fury did on Deontay Wilder in his second fight. I mean, the first fight, I think most of us fancied Deontay Wilder to win, and a lot of people thought that Tyson got the win, although he was knocked down twice. I actually thought a draw for the first fight was probably right. The second fight was a masterclass of boxing against a fighter that, frankly, I never really... I won't say I didn't rate Deontay Wilder. I think Deontay Wilder has a concussive punch, but very little else. And when you're in with a clever fighter like Tyson Fury, you can be, as they say in the game, completely mugged off and have a job done on you, mate. And that's what happened. He'd done a job on him. Now, can AJ and his training camp work out the right strategy to beat Tyson Fury? I say yes. Tyson Fury people say no. And that's why both of us will buy a ticket to watch it.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, we've got to move on. I'm aware of the time, but you talked about your thoughts on boxing in the early days. Wasn't particularly well run, wasn't thinking much about the consumer, etc. Of all the things that you've pulled off, to my mind, it's, if you transport yourself back to the 70s and even the 80s and you saw darts, it's typified, whether you liked it or not, by the famous Not the 9 o'clock news sketch, fat men in smoky pubs, knocking back pints left, right and centre. Fast forward 20 years, as you well know, and you're filling Ali Pali and other venues. You've got celebrities right up to Prince Harry rocking up in their fancy dress, and you've turned these previously, with respect, they tended to be overweight middle-aged men into rock stars. How did you do that?
I can't tell you everything because I might get some competition, and I haven't got much at the moment. The secret is the storyline, the soap opera, the creating the personalities, the characters, and the background. Everyone's important. The first time ever, probably, where the crowd has been almost as important as the players. The fans make a huge percentage of the show. The players, you sell them as ordinary people because people can associate in today's world with ordinary people. It's very difficult for a football fan to associate so closely with a Premiership footballer who prangs his Ferrari and jumps into his spare Ferrari. It's not real. The money they earn is not real. And after a while, you become distanced. Football was built up on local heroes. What we do with darts is we create local heroes. In other words, most dart players look like someone who lives around the street next to you. You know, I'm not going to say they're going to beat Usain Bolt, but I'll tell you what, those guys are putting in 6, 7, 8 hours a day, sacrificing their life to be as good as they can. So whereas in the 90s, you were winning the world championships with a 3-dart average of in the high 80s. Today, you better be averaging 20 points a throw more. You know how much? That's a huge difference over a long duration match. Huge. And that's because they're professional, full-time sportsmen. And they should be given the respect that deserves. The only way they'll get respect, however, is if prize money levels and activity levels rise so that we can become a regular part of our TV menu, which means the ratings will go up, which means the sponsors will chase you, and which means you can charge the television companies around the world far more money and reinvest that in even more events and even more prize money. Darts has become effectively working men's golf. We've had a problem with the perception because ignorant people don't view it as sport or don't view darts players as sportsmen. Those people are resigned to the dustbin in my world. They don't understand. These are real people and they've sacrificed their life to entertain us. Couple that with the customer experience of when you go to darts, you know that you're going to have a great night. You're going to watch world-class sport in the company of your mates while you're having a good time. Basically, it's a party meets a professional sport. And that little menu, that mixture, means that you leave with a smile on your face. And when you go to work or school or home, you want to talk about it. And as you talk about it, you feed the monster that is called the exploitation of darts globally. And trust me when I tell you, in 10 years' time, maybe 15 years' time, I think darts will be as big as golf because there are no barriers to entry. All the things that I was anti when I was growing up, where I felt I had a chip on my shoulder, was usually about barriers to entry. Things, people saying, no, you can't. But with darts, you can. There's no expensive club to join. There's no expensive equipment. You can put a dartboard up in your bedroom, in your garage, where you like. You can go down the pub, perhaps, or you can go to darts clubs. And whether you're 6 years old or whether you're 60 years old, whether you're a man, woman, black, white, female, Muslim, Christian, there's no barriers. It's about ability on the hockey. And for that reason, I see darts having the potential to develop globally into an enormous sport. People think we've done well so far. Trust me, Ian, we haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah. Okay. Clock is ticking. Football, you say dabbled. You more than dabbled. You were chairman of a football club, Leyton Orient. It probably wasn't the most enjoyable of experiences for you. It was quite challenging, wasn't it?
19 years. And 19 years of frustration, aggravation, wondering how you're going to make this business into a success, sleepless nights. And the fascinating thing, I wouldn't swap a second of it. How weird. I mean, I was there when I was 11. I'm not the biggest football fan in the world, to be honest, but that was my local club when I was 11 years old. You never forget that. It's in your psyche. Even now, I'm the president. I still own the ground, so I still got a connection. And it's the first result I look for. Something about football. It's ingrained in you, isn't it, from an early age. And I suppose when I eventually go upstairs to organise the events up in heaven, I hope. If someone asked me to name 10 of the most special moments of my life, and there have been thousands and thousands of them, I think 2 or 3 of the 10 will all be Leyton Orient. Isn't that amazing? And yet nothing about making money, nothing about being super successful, just about the drive home after a good win. You can't put it into words. And that's what makes football so special.
I just had that little image flash in my head there. I don't want to appear blasphemous and nobody be upset by this. I suddenly saw this poster, God versus the Devil, Barry Hearn Promotions.
Pay-per-view. Absolutely. Pay-per-view and no one would moan. No, but we have to move with the times. We have to move with the expectancy of individuals, and we have to have, we can't, for too much sport has been built up in this country, run by blazers, run by people who love the sport, but don't pay enough attention to the sportsmen and women who sacrifice their lives to entertain us. They have got to be rewarded at a level that will inspire other kids to follow in their footsteps. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. But too many people will ignore that, and I don't.
And on that subject, Barry, bearing in mind where you've come from and the barriers that there were, and quite clearly, and we've known each other for a long time, it's been a real drive for you to not annoy anybody, but kick down those barriers. But what you've learned over the years is that you don't need to go to Harvard Business School or Oxbridge. It's common sense, and you found yourself in so many deals and negotiation with better educated people, but you've just used your head, haven't you?
I think common sense is so undervalued. I didn't go to university. I'm not saying you shouldn't go. I think you should do what you're more comfortable doing. My son didn't go to university. My boy has grown up in a different environment than me. He's had the misfortune to grow up with a fairly, a wealthy father. He's been to a private school. He's been picked up. He's not had to go out window cleaning. He didn't do, that wasn't his life. And the satisfaction for me is, despite all of those negatives, in his DNA, there's a grafter. And there's someone with a bit of street. And street is the commodity we all need. And this is the sort of thing that is so absent with governments. There are so many decisions, as I'm getting older now, and I'm not being political because it applies to all governments. I watch people make decisions in government that are usually knee-jerk, popularist, where they just want to say everyone slap their back, which doesn't last, or short-term, no common sense. They don't have the street in them to sit back a bit and say, let's just think this through. And that's the one ingredient in life that can make you successful, which is good news for all the have-nots, and there are millions of them out there of all ages, sexes, whatever. They have a chance in today's world, and they don't have to be a genius. I believe they have to have a work ethic more than being a genius. But the added little bit of oomph, if you like, is that street sense that just recognises one basic factor. Everybody has got to get something out of it. It's got to be, as Rockefeller once said, at the end of every negotiation, all parties should end up with a bit of bread in their mouth. That's how you do business. And that's street sense. That's called survival on the street.
And talking about survival, we were talking about it at the beginning about COVID and the challenges that we all face. Nobody is just consistently successful. We all get slapped back in life, don't we? You in the early 90s, you had a heart attack, and you also faced bankruptcy for a short while. So for a short period of time in the early 90s, having had all that success prior to that, you had a massive challenge. Oh. I mean, you picked yourself up, and here we are. But there's an example of you're going to be challenged in life.
You learn all the time. And certainly COVID has helped us to learn other things. Mine was actually in the late 80s. And I probably, because I'd made quite a lot of money in the early 80s, I probably got complacent, and you register that. So it did happen in the 80s. I got complacent. I'll never get complacent again. In the 80s, I ran not such an efficient business. I still was passionate, but it wasn't. I ended up owing the banks a lot of money because I was in the mood to be expansive. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've made a life of being in the right place at the right time. And then, of course, I suddenly got hit with a recession in 88 that I wasn't expecting. And suddenly, the great thing about it was between 88 and 90 were probably the two best years of my life. They were the 2 years that laid the foundation for 30 years of ongoing increase in profits, increase in turnover, development of my business. They were built on those 2 years of thinking, what on earth am I going to do to get out of this mess? I had to go back to the street. I'd left the street, and I've never left it since. I went back to common sense, basic business techniques, laissez-faire Victorian ideas of making sure that you save for a rainy day, you make sure that your base is covered, you look for risk-reward percentages, You don't kid yourself you're special, because you're not. You're only as good as how you work. And that, I learned that. So it was, I don't think I was particularly close to bankruptcy. I was close to going back to getting a proper job. That was the worst. That was worse than bankruptcy. I didn't want to go back to a proper life, but I had fallen foul of a few basic rules, which that was the character I developed in those 2 years from 88 to 90 is the character that has built my company and changed my life for the better. And I hope for other people's as well.
Okay, let's finish with a little bit of fun. This is a reoccurring question that's come in during the night. They're both on boxing. The first one is your all-time fantasy fight. Who is it between? You're obviously promoting it. Where's the venue and who wins?
Oh, my all-time fantasy fight. Well, this is a tough one, but I think if you're talking, there are 2 or 3 fighters out there historically that I've always followed, and I'm not going to go back into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, because I think probably the people listening won't understand. I would probably pick the greatest of all time, obviously Muhammad Ali, and a fighter who I thought in his early years was going to be the greatest of all time, which frankly he didn't become, which was Mike Tyson. The style of Tyson wasn't the same as Joe Frazier, but the trilogy of fights between Ali and Frazier were classic fights. They were probably only beaten in my mind by the trilogy of fights between Mickey Ward and Arturo Gatti, which, if anyone hasn't watched those 3 fights, not for any titles, just 3 of the most outstanding fights we've ever seen. But in the real world of showbiz, if you like, Ali Frazier was as good as it got. And I think that could only be bettered by Ali Tyson, because I don't know whether the short hooks coming up from Tyson whether he would have landed on Ali. When, again, we talk about they've both got to be at their prime to really understand it. Where would we stage a fight like that? Well, of course, coming up in the next few weeks, there is only one boxing venue in the world where the eyes and attention of the world will be focused. And it's MSG, of course, which is not. Some clever dicks will be saying, oh, Madison Square Gardens? No, of course not. It's Maskell's Square Gardens. In other words, Eddie Hearn's back garden.
You're going to say that.
Which starts in a few weeks' time. It's the most phenomenal experiment that's costing me a fortune. And because he's my son, I can't say no, because he's creating something novel and he's thinking street. So I would want that fight without a massive crowd, with a crowd of 2 people watching. Me and my son, Eddie, enjoying the fight of all time. But frankly, that may be surpassed sometime in 2021 when Fury and Joshua get in the ring. And certainly that's something that we all want to see as fight fans in this country. And God bless all of them.
Who wins, Ali or Tyson?
I think Ali, but I think it's a hell of a fight. And if he's going to have to pepper him to deter him, because Tyson was the best. At 18 to 21, I think Mike Tyson was the best fighter I've ever seen.
Yeah. And the final fun question, then we could have to leave it, which is a shame because I could listen to you all night, frankly, is you've now been given the task of building your perfect boxer, okay? So in other words, who'd you pick for power? Who'd you pick for speed, agility, maybe heart? That's massively important. Maybe a right and maybe a left.
Well, you're talking. This is almost an impossible question, so I'm going to upset a few people by leaving them out here. If it comes to heart, I'd probably. I mean, you're talking about tough guys. I don't believe today's boxers are actually as tough as the boxers from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because I think in those days they were really fighting to put bread on the table. Today we've been spoilt with the welfare state and jobs and opportunities that didn't exist for those. They were really tough guys. So I'm not such an expert in that level of toughness. I would have to say I want a fighter with the heart of Carl Froch, because I think he was just one horrible, tough bastard. I want speed. I obviously want speed. So when you're looking at it, I like Are we talking just British or are we talking world? You know,
no, anyone.
Anyone in the world. You know, I was a great fan of Azuma Nelson. I thought Azuma Nelson was one of the great fighters I've ever seen. When you come if you're really going to go back, I would have to go back to the Muhammad Ali of the Far East, Sochitolada, the WBC flyweight champion, who had speed and grace and combinations. When you're talking about, obviously, you've got to put some of Sugar Ray Leonard in there. You've got to put a little bit of Marvin Hagler. You're making a recipe of a fighter. You know? If you want nastiness, you put a bit of Roberto Duran in. As far as the British fighters, when it comes to punching power, Ernie Shaver's probably the hardest right-hand puncher of all time. I don't think Joshua will be that far behind him. I think this is why I believe that Joshua beats Tyson Fury. I think Joshua, when he hits you, hits harder than Deontay Wilder as well. This boy can really punch, and he's getting better. He's still improving, which is a bit scary for anybody. So, yeah, I think there's a combination of a few names. I'm sure there's thousands of others I've forgotten. But the good thing about it is there's always going to be someone else in boxing. There's always going to be the next talent. You know, how good is Joshua Boazzi going to be at light heavyweight? Ooh, interesting. Every time you look at it, how far can Katie Taylor really go? How can she take women boxing to the next level? There's so many questions here. And as you say, we could do this over 3, 4, 5 hours and still not finish the subject, which makes it all the more entertaining and all the more interesting. But in the meantime, I've given it my best shot, as they once said.
Well done. Well, it's a great pub debate, which, by the way, could be an idea. But anyway, maybe that's for another time. Barry, the time is up. I'm afraid the final bell has rung. The final ball has been potted. We've come to the end of time. I hope people watching and listening have got a lot out of this. I'm sure they have, not just the stories, but the messages as well. We can all do it if we put our mind to it and we stay modest. We graft and we use our head. And just refuse to be beaten. Just refuse. And when you get knocked down, you get up. And when you get knocked down again, as you will, you get up again and you don't stop getting up. Then you'll find out what type of person you are as well, by the way. And not everyone can do it. No, but the winners do. Barry, you've been an absolutely star, as you always are tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
I hope you enjoyed. Nice to talk to you, my friend.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. We'll catch up with you again soon. And look after yourself. Keep the energy. I'm sure you will.
Will do, mate. Thanks, Ian.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Bye-bye. Barry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody. Well, that was Barry Hearn in sparkling form, as always. I hope you enjoyed listening and watching that as much as I did talking to Barry. Lots of life lessons. I'm going to go away and make a few notes myself now. We come to the end of another 60-minute show. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, next Tuesday, we're back to our sports quiz with the stars, and our co-host, my co-host that next week is Johnny Herbert, who's got a great story to tell as well. And we always have a little interview at half-time during our quiz. We got Lizzie Arnold joining us as well. She was a great lunch guest at the Sporting Club a couple of years ago as well. So anyway, that's it for tonight. Thanks again to our sponsors at Jura and Sedulu and Fanatics and Source One Associates and Vinex and IPS. Enjoy your evening. Stay safe, everybody. Still, we're not out of the woods. Keep well. Have a great week, and we'll see you at same time, same place next week. Thank you and good night.